All right, so let's unpack that with our front bench. With me this evening, former BC Premier Christy Clark. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Toronto Mayor John Tory and CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Happy Thursday.
Hi.
Tom, I'll start with you on this one because I can't remember the last time the NDP supported something explicitly that the Tories wanted. How significant do you think that is?
I think it's an important move, and it also shows that Pierre Poilievre isn't just clever at going after Justin Trudeau's votes. He's also starting to eat into the vote of the NDP in exactly the type of area that he mentioned in the clip that we just listened to. So, yes, the NDP is paying attention to pocketbook issues as well. They understand that the carbon tax has an overarching great purpose, which is to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases produced in Canada. But at the same time, there are parts of what Mr. Trudeau announced out of the blue 1 week ago exactly that are very difficult to follow, to be charitable about it. How is it possible to remove the carbon tax on something that pollutes the most and keep the carbon tax on natural gas, which produces far less pollution? So the whole theory behind this was to go after the things that pollute the most and reduce it. But there was a reason for them not to do it, as was just explained. They're in political trouble. Any port in a storm, they're going to try to wing their way out of this thing with all sorts of explanations about heat pumps being given to families. I'm really anxious to see, Vassy, how much of that actually turns out to be true. It's Justin Trudeau in a lot of trouble. I've never seen him paint himself into a corner like this. He's usually very good himself, and he's definitely always had a good team. But on this one, it's just a total debacle for them.
You're three great political minds and strategic minds. John, does it seem to you as though they did not fully anticipate what the backlash would be like, not just from the opposition, which you can assume, but really from other parts of the country as well?
You know, I think it's maybe that they were thinking you can never go wrong doing the right thing, but actually that's not true. There can be times in politics, in any event, when doing the right thing is not the right thing to do, meaning politically. And I think that, how could they not have anticipated that this was going to cause a massive firestorm in other parts of the country, depending on how you heated your home? I mean, they did some right things. I mean, the greater recognition of the fact rural Canadians can't get on a transit system, or, in many cases can't get natural gas to heat their homes is a belated recognition. But to do it in this way, and I think the real thing to watch here is going to be, whether the caucus holds together. And I don't just mean in a parliamentary vote. And for that matter, the cabinet. I mean, they've now, tinkered with, if that's the right word, maybe worse than that, their signature policy. And there are people in that cabinet who believe very strongly in that policy, very strongly. And, if you got a resignation from caucus or cabinet, I mean, a few votes in a parliamentary vote is not great, to say the least. So I just think part of it is the speed with which they're reacting to what is undoubtedly some discontent in the caucus, and I understand why, because of polls and otherwise, but they're doing it quickly and as a result don't seem to think through things that maybe are quite obvious.
Christy, John makes a good point about some of the members around the cabinet table who would be upset at the idea of a carve-out at all. I would imagine that includes the Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, who about a month before this announcement was made, when Alberta was asking for a carve-out on net zero for the electricity grid, said, you can't, that would just be unfair, right? I'm wondering to what degree you think that might have informed the Prime Minister coming out a few days after this announcement and saying no more carve-outs.
Well, I think absolutely. He started a run on premiers and provinces rightly wanting carve-outs for themselves based on the way that the things that are unique in each of their jurisdictions. And I think Tom is absolutely right about the New Democrats. They are in the fight of their lives for working people because Pierre Poilievre is just, he's got this low tax, bigger wallets, less regulation message, and working people are really flocking to that away from the NDP. So you got that on the one side. And on the other side, the thing that I thought was really most notable about this, and I think probably explains part of the really strong reaction that the public has had to it, is that the one thing that Justin Trudeau has been consistently good at, I think, is showing that he had real resolve around the environment, that he really cared about it, that he was absolutely determined to make sure that he protected these as values and principles. And I think the character hit that he took from this, that he gave himself by backing away from that and proving that he's just a guy who cares about getting elected and he doesn't really care that much about his environmental policy at the end of the day. I think that's really what's hurting him. It's not the speed of it. It's not even the details of it. I think it's really become a Justin Trudeau character issue. When the going gets tough, Justin Trudeau chucks his principles out the window.
That's an interesting point. And we're going to talk, Tom, in the next segment about some of the kind of open discussion that's happening right now about his leadership of the party. Your thoughts overall, though, on kind of jumping off what Christy said, the larger implications for his credibility, for the party and the government's credibility on climate, given that, just like Christy said, right, like this was the thing he didn't bend on. For years and for months when the affordability crisis was peaking, you know, they were insistent, his ministers and himself, that this marquee part of their policy was necessary in order to achieve our targets.
It was indeed necessary, because otherwise we will never achieve our targets. But the problem for Trudeau is exactly the one you identified, Vassy. It's credibility. So he was able to win in 2015 by promising to get serious on climate change. I was there with him in Paris for the signature of the Paris Accord. He had great, words in that hall. Canada is back and all that. Got back to Canada, had Stephen Harper's plan, targets and timeline. And even that he wasn't able to get done, even though he had laughed at those things during the campaign. He thumped Andrew Scheer on this issue a great deal. And he went after and won against O'Toole as well, pointing out the fact that they didn't really believe in the fight against climate change. This time around, everybody's saying, well, to Poilievre, look, we've already had elections on climate and on carbon pricing and things like that. We've already had those elections. The answer is yes, we have, but the Liberals never got it done. And so now, and I really think it's smart, but Christy was saying before, you think of somebody like Stephen Guilbeault, who's put a lot of his own credibility on the table, not always easy, because Trudeau has been very slow getting there. But now that they were finally almost there, and they had something that could be shown in the shop window to people who care about climate change and about the environment and sustainable development, they're removing it. So where does that leave them? It's a real lose-lose situation. And I think that's why you got that great smile on Pierre Poilievre as he goes after Trudeau on this one. Poilievre doesn't even have to prove anything. Everybody who knows the guy knows that he won't do anything to fight climate change. It's not even the issue anymore. It's whether or not Trudeau did anything. And the answer is no.
John, is there a way for the Prime Minister and the Liberals to bounce back from something like this? Do you anticipate, for example, that they will get some resonance or some uptick in Atlantic Canada?
Well, they better hope so, because otherwise, why did you do that? But, you're in the worst of all worlds. And I think Tom was just implying this a moment ago, that you disappoint the people who were with you when you said we're going to stand firm on the environment. And I think Justin Trudeau was quoted this week as having said sometime in the past, I'd rather keep my integrity and lose than sacrifice it. And, my political sort of integrity, my policy integrity. So now the people who believe fervently enough to actually assist in reelecting them, albeit with a minority, are upset. And then the people who are against the tax and who are climate change deniers and a whole host of other people, they'll just be delighted. And they weren't voting for him anyway. And so I don't know what you do to get out of this, because you can't. I mean, if you reverse yourself, a debacle, as Tom described it, would become a worse debacle if you ever reversed yourself in Atlantic Canada. And again, some of these things were not lacking in sense. I mean, like the heat pumps and some of the attention to rural Canadians. I think the one thing as well that's happened since all of these discussions of the last several years is an affordability crisis. And that is now layered on top of everything else at the very, very top. And I just don't think they reacted well enough or fast enough to that. So it doesn't, now they're left with these kinds of seemingly knee-jerk policy reactions that are one-off things instead of some kind of a comprehensive plan to look at affordability measures, say with the rebates.